In talking about Jules Cheret and women in the art of advertising, it really was Cheret who brought back lithography as a serious art form during this particular period. Before this time, your billboards, your advertisements, your posters, they were primarily just typesetting. There weren't really any images associated with those particular features during that time. So what Cheret did with these images of women that he created in these bright and vibrant yellows and blues and reds was he set a precedent of what was going to be coming in advertising and the posters, and how women were depicted in those as well. So in looking at this obsession with the female form throughout art history, we have to go way back in time, and three prominent groups keep reappearing throughout history in paintings and sculpture, and that's going to be the images of the mother, the goddess, and the muse. Now, many of the poster artists during this particular period, they used the idea of the goddess and the muse as central key elements in their artwork, largely in part because of their sexuality, and at the same time the vulnerability that these women in this particular type created. At this particular time, and of course before that, we have to remember that these were male artists doing work for male patrons, and the primary audience, at least at the beginning, was going to be a male audience as well too. So it's not that Cheret didn't use nudity or partial nudity in his works. It's not that he didn't use seductive images in his posters. But what happened was that Cheret used color, he used fashion, perspective, cropping. All these things complemented the female form. He used a little part of the mother, the goddess, and the muse in his artwork so that his images weren't just a spectacle for the male gaze. It was something a little different and something completely new. So the main focus of Cheret's posters really was the female. The commodity being sold or the advertisement really was a second nature in his posters or his works. It was these females that became the prominent images of the poster. Males were seldom used. They were often in the background or on the sidelines or something like that. And looking at this poster of Cheret Carnival 1892, we see a real good example of what later became known as the Cheret girl. The Cheret girl is a characteristic form that Jules Cheret used. She appeared over and over in many of his posters and advertisements. And the Cheret girl, she was always smiling. She was living life in the moment, thin and curvaceous, and most all the time she was a redhead. If the woman in one of his images wasn't a redhead, it probably wasn't a Cheret girl. It was probably a specific person or location that they were advertising for a specific event. But this is a lot different representation, showing these women enjoying society as part of society. They're not in the background anymore. They're not a prostitute. They're not a muse. They're not a mother. It's something, a new form that Cheret's showing here, that she's actually part of the Paris society. Now, we're really not sure who the Cheret girl was. There's a lot of debate, possibly that it was his wife. That's never really been confirmed. And this is an important quality just because that many of the other poster artists that we're looking at, Alfonso Mucha, Pierre Bernard, even Toulouse, we can identify those models. And once again, they were part of that particular lifestyle. They were dancers, they were prostitutes, they were mistresses. They were specific people that these guys were using. So in making this image of the Cheret girl, who was really no woman in particular, she could be anybody. So when Cheret did do a poster or an advertisement for a public figure or a dancer or someone like that, such as Louis Filler right here, he wasn't capturing the actual portrait image of that particular person. They were very whimsical, cartoonish, maybe even so. With this comparison right here, you can actually see that he probably used images like the one on the right to create his poster, and he said he was trying to capture the actual essence of what she was doing. He said it wasn't so much about making a exact replica duplicate of the person in question. I mean, the people at the time would have known who this person was. especially with the name recognition down at the bottom. He was trying to lure an audience into it. Looking at the overall image that Cheret's created here, it's not a provocative image. This was meant for an audience of men and women and children all alike. Regardless of where she was dancing at, he could have made this much more provocative, much more sensual, revealing type image than what we actually see here. But that wasn't his style. That's what he was trying to do. The perspective that we're seeing here is the dance captured in a quick motion. So one of the easiest ways to see how Cheret did things differently is looking at side-by-side comparisons of some other pieces by some of Cheret's contemporaries on the same subject matter. So in this first one here, we're looking at two images, the Moulin Rouge. The one on the left is the Paris Can-Can by Cheret. The one on the right is La Goulet by Toulouse. The one on the left, it's not his signature Cheret girl. She doesn't have the red hair. Looking at the hairstyles and even the kind of the polka dot style dress, it may be the same subject, which is Louise Weber, which we know is the subject of Toulouse's poster on the right. But in any case, our subject on the left, she's enticingly dressed. She's got the low-cut front. The close cropped. It's not the full image. And our subject here, she's returning our gaze. She's not a voyeur. She knows she's being looked at. She's looking back at us. She even gives us a nice little hand flip inviting us in. So this is quite different than the approach Toulouse takes in his moment. He's capturing the dance at a moment, looking at the subject from her backside. Her dress is up in the air. She's very revealed. She's very vulnerable in this particular state. It's a much more direct approach. So, and if that's not even enough, Toulouse has actually even put in another male figure in here who's turning to his side so that we can be a voyeur with him as well. So in this particular comparison, it's all about the perspective and how the woman is being personified. With Cheret, she's not being offered to us. She's basically being a greeting to us, where with Toulouse, it's just the opposite. She is just a vision of the male. So in this second comparison, we're looking for job cigarettes. And on the left is going to be Cheret. On the right is going to be Alphonse Mucha. So Cheret uses his traditional Cheret girl. She's red-haired, very fashionably dressed for the day. She's high-spirited, held up high. The dress is very revealing. It's a low-cut back. It shows her form. It shows her curves. But it doesn't really reveal anything underneath that. And the cigarette's in the scene, but it's not as prominent as to the right with Mucha there. The central figure and the idea of Cheret, of course, is the female in this thing. She's returning her gaze. She knows she's being looked at. It's not like she's the receptacle of being a voyeur or anything like that. It's just not anywhere near as a vulnerable image of a woman as it is with Mucha on the right over there. So in looking at Mucha's, his female, she's laid back, she's curled up. Her dress is very sheer, it's very see-through. You can make out everything from her midriff up, from her breast area and whatnot. Her leg is sticking out down at the bottom. Mucha really is using the idea of the goddess in this particular image. If you think about Medusa with the long flowing head of snakes, that's the idea that we're getting here with her long and tangled black hair that's falling back behind her body. So with Mucha, his subject is offering the cigarette as well as herself. So it's a completely different feel in the way that he handles the material in this particular instance. In this comparison here with Stahl being the contemporary, the poster on the left is Cheret, the Quinquina de Bonnet. Cheret gives us his signature Cheret girl. She's red-haired. She's dressed very elegantly with a fashionable dress of that particular period. She's returning our gaze back to us. She's offering the viewer a drink. She's not offering herself again. She's just offering a drink, which if you look in comparison to the Stahl on the right, we've got an oversized bottle of champagne that she's holding up. It's very phallic in nature. Her top matches the green color of the grapes down there. It's sheer and it's see-through. So it really is just a way that Cheret handles the subject matter. It didn't matter if it was cigarettes or alcohol or a dance hall or a concert. He didn't change his style or the manner that he handled the way he portrayed women in any of these things. It was consistent all the way through there. It was always very fashionable. It was always very flattering to women. These things, it was a woman that other women who saw the poster could aspire to be and say, hey, I could be that person. I could go out and it's okay. It was just a very different view that Cheret portrayed to women of what they could be, as opposed to how things really were for women in Paris prior to that time and still during this time. If clothes maketh the man, they must surely make the woman as well too. And I think this is an idea that Cheret was very keen with in his choice of the dress that he chose for his images. A lot of time these dresses were out of character for the scene. Obviously, in this Paris Courses poster, she's wearing a snow white dress, high heels, large bonnet up on top, but she's riding side saddle on horseback. So they weren't always practical for the scene, but they were practical for the women of the times. They were very progressively dressed, and not just in the dress, but also in the scenes that he depicted them in. Of course, freedom in the way someone dresses usually equates to some type of freedom in their behavior. So you're dressing the part, so to speak. So they weren't just the mothers in the house. They weren't just the wives going to cocktail parties. These fashions were meant to be out and seen, but not in an elite type manner. The dresses in question were fairly high end, I guess you would say. They were very fashionable, very modern. It was probably things that he saw in the windows as he drove around town, or possibly even his wife would wear. But they weren't just for the elite social events. Middle class on up could still afford these types of dresses. They were for everyone, so to speak. So with Cheret placing these women in these activities that were usually just associated with men, it's always a progressive as well too, to show Parisians and show men that it's okay for the women to be in these types of situations. And it's also telling the women it's okay for you to do these things. These posters, with nothing else just being seen by everyone, it gives an automatic thing in someone's head that, oh, it's okay. Which beforehand, a lot of the scenes and a lot of these activities that were just associated with men were exclusively for men. The women weren't involved. They weren't allowed to go to them. So what Cheret is doing, he really did a precursor in setting these ideas about what women were no longer just the mothers and the housewives and the homemakers. He really did set this precedent that women can do all these things, and it's okay for them to be a part of the Paris society. So one last example here of Cheret's, this Palais de Glace. Once again, we see here a typical Cheret girl, very fashionably dressed with the red hair. But one thing I wanted to point out, and especially with this particular image, is that she's alone. She's not with a husband. She doesn't have children with her. She doesn't have any chaperone that's particularly there with her that one could per se. This is a big step. Most of the time women, single women especially, they had some family member, or they had a chaperone, or their husband. They usually just didn't go out alone per se. There was always someone there with them, monitoring with them, or guiding them, or protecting their modesty, or whatever you wanted to call it. But this is a very progressive and modern independent woman. She's out by herself. There's no one there with her that we know of anyway, at least not that we can see. So with Cheret's posters, it was everything. It was the fashion. It was his perspective. It was the way that he handled the media. It was the angle that he showed the women in his images. He used all of these things to present the women in a very fashionable and a very desirable, very sensual manner. But at the same time, he wasn't offering them as a muse or a mother or a maiden or anything like nature. He was showing us a progressive and a new woman in the Paris lifestyle, and showing women what they could be and what they could enjoy out of Paris life. If they could be independent and strong, and at the still time very beautiful.